Hello, and welcome to this month's Dolby Atmos Music Community Session. I'm Ben Guyver, Senior Creative Relations with Dolby Laboratories, and in this month's session, I'm very excited to be joined by New York City producer, mix and mastering engineer, Fab Dupont. Fab's the owner of Flux Studios and the Pure Mix platform, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And he joins for a one-on-one interview off the top, and then we'll be joined for more conversation and live Q&A with New York-based producer and mix engineer Nick Hard. Fab and Nick worked together on the Dolby Atmos mix of the new Snarky Puppy album, Empire Central. Nick has been recognized with a Grammy for his previous stereo mix work with Snarky Puppy, and together they have turned out mixes of a truly amazing new album from this four-time Grammy Award-winning band, which is comprised on this record of 19 musicians and led by creator, bass player, and producer Michael League. Really cool album. Empire Central was performed and recorded entirely live in Dallas, where Snarky Puppy is based, and the record is described by the band as a unique sound that now rises like a skyscraper from a 21st century orchestra comprising 3 guitarists, at least 4 keyboardists, 2 brass, 2 reeds, a violinist, multiple percussionists, and drummers, all led by the accomplished yet modest Michael League, keeping it together with his bass. So super excited to get into the mix with Fab and Nick. So please drop your questions into the question box here in the go-to window or email them to musicwebinars@dolby.com. You can also send your suggestions and comments to this address as well. We absolutely welcome and encourage your input. A couple quick things before we get into Fab and Nick. I mentioned a few sessions ago that we were dropping exclusive content from our conversations at this year's NAMM show as part of our Hear from the Masters series with mixing and mastering engineers. You've probably seen the pieces from Nick Reeves and Steve Genowick, the legendary Bob Clearmountain, and our final interview in that series was released, and that features Chuck Ainlay talking about his mix work on the new Lyle Lovett album, 12th of June, and his use of native rendering in Nuendo. So be sure to check that out at professional.dolby.com and on our YouTube site as well. We've actually just released a new Hear from the Masters piece, which features Miami-based mix engineer and educator Natalia Schlesinger, who's been on our music community sessions a few times, from Art House Studios and Abbey Road Institute in Miami. Natalia talks about her Atmos mix work on records by Sebastian Yatra and Jan Juanes, how she's also educating the next generation of mix engineers in Atmos, along with Robin Rumors and the team at Abbey Road Studios and Institute in Miami. An additional profile piece focuses on Julio Reyes Capello and his Art House Miami studio, which is the home of Abbey Road Institute. So be sure to check that out at professional.dolby.com and on our YouTube site as well. Wanted to quickly mention some of our studio resources. You're probably very aware that we have our dedicated studio teams around the world and our music studios onboarding site that allows current or prospective studios to connect directly with us for support. That's again at professional.dolby.com, and that's the studio's onboarding portal. You can enter your current studio specs and your room dimensions, and our studio team will come back with recommendations on system implementation and connect you with resellers if you desire, and work to help you achieve your goals for your studio. So be sure to check that out. Be sure to also check out the music studio's best practices guides, which are available as PDFs at our site at professionaldolby.com. Those are designed to help you with everything from room layout to speaker positioning, response recommendations, room calibration, signal flow, to help you along the way in getting your studio set up. Learning.dolby.com has all of the Dolby Atmos music training, which is that complete self-paced music curriculum available in 5 different languages with downloadable exercise content and templates. The knowledge base is there as well, which features the quick start videos for different DAWs and tools. There are a ton of articles there, user forum and FAQs. A lot of questions are answered there, and it's driven by many contributions from you in the music creative community. So we welcome you to engage with us there and be a part of that conversation. A few sessions ago on the Dolby Atmos Music Community webinar here, we featured a conversation with Andrew Mendelson and Luke Armentrout of Georgetown Masters, which was hosted by Dolby's Jordan Glasgow. Jordan was demonstrating how the Dolby Atmos Album Assembler allows you to apply the finishing touches to your songs and sequence your Atmos albums, A/B with stereo, adjust levels, apply EQ and limiting. And we took a look at how mastering engineers like Andrew and Luke are using that tool in their studio to master albums. It's a really interesting conversation, so be sure to check that out at our site as well. And if you haven't yet, you can download a free 90-day trial of the Dolby Atmos album assembler at professional.dolby.com as well. There's also a quick start video at our pro site. And with that, let's jump into our chat with Fab Dupont, and we'll then be joined by Nick Hard. Please add your questions into the questions menu here in GoTo, or send them to musicwebinars@dolby.com. I'm very happy to be joined now by New York City-based producer, mix and mastering engineer, and the owner of Flux Studios in the East Village, Mr. Fab Dupont. Fab's recently done the Dolby Atmos mix on the new Snarky Puppy album, Empire Central, from his dungeon room at Flux. If you have questions for Fab, please drop them into the question box here in the go-to menu, and we will answer those in just a few minutes. Fab, good to see you, man. How are you? How was your summer?
Life is good. Summer was peaceful. I traveled a lot. No airline lost my luggage. Life is good. I've been back for 5 days, and I'm dealing with the onslaught of stuff I didn't deal with while I was not being bumped from flight to flight. So it's all good. Life is good.
Good. I know it was a mad summer for flight delays. I was fortunate enough not to be involved in any, but I've heard some horror stories from other folks. So
we got
glad
really
you're
lucky.
back safe and sound, man. So tell us a little bit about your background and how Flux Studios came together there in the East Village.
Well, I moved to New York making records. I've always made records. And then I moved to New York from Boston, and I had to finish some records that were not, done. It was a swift, quick move. It was an escape. We escaped Boston, if you will. And then we arrived in New York, and I found an ad on the DigiDesign user group of some dude who was renting a room. And so I answered the ad, and I came in. I was like, I'll rent the room for a couple months, finish those projects, and then either we'll find something else. And now it's been almost 20 years, and we have the whole building. So it started from a room the size of a laptop, like it was like this, and then I guess I got lucky and then expanded. Now Flux is 8 studios,
and it's an absolutely beautiful combination of rooms. It's really kind of a creative space spread across all of those floors there. And, particularly being in such a cool neighborhood like the East Village, it's kind of like a perfect lower Manhattan sort of vibe. You've got a cool blend of modern and vintage gear, and, kind of gets great natural light and in such a cool spot. It's really kind of a creative space. Who are some of the artists you've worked with there at Flux?
I mean, it's amazing. We being in New York and being pretty discreet. So we get it runs the gamut. It runs like we do sessions for Paul McCartney, and we do sessions for like completely unknown up and coming people. And in the middle, there's like, Shakira or Jesse Malin, or like it's David Crosby, or right now we have Juan Ariza, amazing producer, Eduardo Cabra from Calle 13, to like, I don't know, some person from New York who's trying to make a record. It's a very democratic environment. I love it. And so there's some rock stars, and then there's some unknown, but it's fun. I open my door here and I can bump into just about anybody.
And such a legendary part of the city too. You've got like the beginnings of US punk rock kind of happening there.
Yep.
Of course, you've got disco, and you've got hip hop, and all of that kind of happening.
And the
there.
Strokes recording is in this building. And the last studio we're going to reopen is the studio that they recorded that record in it, and we're going to call it Transporter, actually, in honor of their record. And they record here. They come and practice here. Julian is coming here this month, so it's kind of like a best kept secret. Not secret anymore, but it's like a little alcove. It's not designed like a traditional studio.
Yeah,
it's more like
it's got a totally great vibe to it. It's not like clinical and super clean, and I mean, it's clean, but it's not like so like clinical that you don't feel like you can be creative there.
I designed it for myself. It's a bunch of living rooms with instruments in it, and they happen to sound pretty good. And it's conducive. People love it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you hold events there regularly and bring people through, kind of bringing the community together, which I think is super cool as well. So how did you get hooked up with Michael League and the Snarky Puppy band?
I know Michael for years. I think the first record, because Michael was a New York, staple before he moved back to the old world. But so he was doing a lot of stuff in New York. He was growing Snarky Puppy. He was doing really good, and I was making my records here, and then our paths crossed. I think our first record that we collaborated on was for Lucy Woodward, like 10 years ago, and then he was co-producing or like consulting for an unbelievable artist named Magda Janiku. Her band name is Banda Magda, and she had finished her first record, and she was very unhappy with the mix. And Michael said, "You maybe want to go see the French guy." Especially since that record was in French, which was intense for a Greek lady. And so I got that record, and then the next Band Aid record we co-produced, and then that one thing led to another, and then he gave me a call for the David Crosby record, the first David Crosby record that he produced, and then he called me for the Eliades Ochoa from Buena Vista Social Club, and then he called me for Susana Baca, and then he called me again for Cross. He didn't call me again for Cross, so it just grew that way. And then because he's for Snarky, his engineer is Nick. Nick does all the Snarky stuff, and so I don't do. And Michael is very faithful, very loyal to his teams. So and Nick, does an awesome job. So there's no need for me to be there. But for the Atmos version, since Nick hadn't had Atmos experience before, then I was chosen to do the Atmos version with Nick. So Nick mixed the whole record in stereo at Michael's in Spain, and then he flew over and he sat with me for the entire Atmos mix, which was awesome because mixing Atmos records, if the producer or the stereo mixer are not in the room, depending on how much poetic license you're given by the label, you may spend a lot of time trying to chase the stereo mix, which it's a skill, but it's it puts you in a certain space. You have to make an Atmos version of that stereo mix. With Nick in the room, I was like, "Can we do this?" And he was like, "Yes." And then by the third day, he was like, "Hey, could we do that?" I was like, "Yeah," because he's there and because it's his work that we are Atmosing. It's a word. Then we were able to do a lot more things that I would not have done by myself. Otherwise, it would have generated a lot of back and forth. Oh, I'm going to put the percussions all the way in the back. That's a bold move. If Nick hadn't been there, I would have to send him a ref. He would have to say yes or no, song by song, everything. And he was there. I was like, "Yeah, I love how it feels." Boom. And now we have this ultra immersive record. So the record is actually more Atmosy, also a word, and more immersive because Nick was there and because he was an active participant, and because any crazy idea I had, we could run by him in real time. And he was the guardian of the tone of the record since he tracked it and he mixed it in stereo. So he's got it in his mind more than I do. So instead of, taking the record on tangents by just going crazy and putting 100% what I would do in a vacuum, we were able to pay respect to the stereo mix, but really make it a truly Atmos experience, which is nice.
Yeah. And let's talk a little bit about the assets that you were presented with. I mean, of course, you're coming from a producer who is there at the recording stage. You probably weren't there at the recording stage, but they went into it kind of with an immersive experience in mind, thinking about, hey, we're going to record live all in one room together, up to 19 musicians or however many it was, with kind of a crowd there too, and really capture that live feeling of being in the room with them. And you are working from those assets to kind of recreate that experience immersively. And that must have been exciting to kind of like sit down with Nick, having him being there from the inception of it, and sit down and be able to create an Atmos with such great assets. You're
Yeah,
really
it was
working with some.
a lot of thought went into it. I actually had never been in a situation where you could decide on what to do at the recording stage, right? So we actually had conversations with Nick as to what we would do to be able to have some natural assets that we could use for immersive mixing. And yeah, and so they hung some lots of overheads, and there were a lot of room mics, and he was recording in the round, and the crowd was in the middle, and so it created a bunch of really interesting issues, but yeah, the whole thing was designed like that. And actually, one of the things is I was there. I went to Texas because we shot a making of the record for platform PureMax, and that's coming out September 2022 or October 2022, depending on the weather. And so there's an actual making of the whole thing, so people will be able to see how it was, what the thought process went into it. But yeah, they were ambiances, and they were and I called a bunch of my friends who are scoring engineers who have to deal with this all the time and say, hey, what do we do? What should we do? So I got some interesting information from my friends in LA and in London, and then I passed it on to Nick, and then he did this thing. And then we had a lot of pre-production talks about how you're going to stem this out. There's 20 musicians, there's 3 drummers, there's 3 percussion players, there's 4 keyboard players, there's 4 guitar players. It's insane, right? It's totally insane. So like trying to imagine how we were going to spatialize that, and who is going to sit where, and how is it going to look with the video, because the whole album is 100% on camera. So if you think for a second, it's like this spent months mixing movies to match the spatialization of the sound based on what's on the screen. Here we can't do it because the point of view changes all the time. So maybe there's a scene where you see Larnell, the drummer, front and center, right? And then he cuts to Michael playing a lick, and then the next thing you see all 3 drummers, Larnell's on the left. Where do I put the drums? That was, we had some long discussions about that, and in the end we chose to disregard, to not be 100% tied to the picture, but to use the picture suggestion that's going to give the listener a suggestion, so that when they listen to the record they really feel like they were there.
And so when you're like setting up the session, like kind of technically at the beginning of it, you're sitting down with Nick, you're coming from, obviously the recorded assets. Are you thinking about like, okay, I'm writing down or looking at where these people were sitting in the room, and then kind of auditioning it in the room, and saying, hey, maybe this should be a little bit more towards the front, or maybe
That was the
this.
principle. The reality is that listening to it didn't work. So so what we ended up doing is we ended up panning the 3 drummers. So Nick created a bunch of stems from his stereo mixes. All the drummers, each drummer separate, basically each musician separate. Those were the stems. So we ended up with a way above average amount of stems for an Atmos mix. It was a lot of stuff. Then about the second day, he had brought his computer. By the second day, we're like, okay, can you export this one separate? Can you import? So we ended up having the bass drum separate. We ended up with anywhere between 30 to 50 stems per song, because there were also the rooms. They were like whatever, special events. So it was, for Atmos mix, it was probably the heaviest Atmos mix I've ever done. Plus there was the video, right? So it got intense. But my original vision of how I wanted to pan it, got completely scrapped in the middle of the mix of the first song, except for the 3 drummers being left, center, and right at about 30%, like this, and that stayed, and that's the constant, and also the bass being in the middle, and then the rest changes from song to song. There's a lot of the percussions. All 3 percussion players are spread just like the drummers, but reverse and mirrored in the back, and that puts you right inside of the record, and it's awesome because don't forget there's bleed. It's all live in one room, right? So there's crazy, and Nick did an amazing job at limiting that, but it's Larnell hitting hard, right? So in the percussion mini mic that's on the literally 10 feet away from him, you can hear Larnell or JT or whomever, right? And so they were bleed. So we took advantage of that and put the stuff in the back so that you get this like crazy immersive vibe. And then we used his overhead. He had overhead rooms, and we used that to create a little bit of a blur. We made sure that it wasn't too pinpointy, and it created a certain blur, and it worked out pretty good. But it took us about 2-3 days. I think we mixed the record in. We did a first pass. I think we did the whole thing about 10-11 days. Some of the songs are 10 minutes, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
They're amazing songs.
it takes forever, and it's 20 musicians. But the thing that's amazing is that the thing is live. Like, there's no doctoring, there's no tuning. That's just who they are. It's pretty awesome.
Really awesome.
That level of control is off the charts. And
one of the tracks that has the really killer percussion treatment, like you were saying, I'm not sure if it's one or two, is the track Bet. It's kind of like a fusion kind of rock jam that has really killer horn work and super funky syncopated drums. And it just comes through so nicely in Atmos.
I really like that one. I think they just released that as a single recently. It's great. They were all every song. You know, the crazy thing is that they got together a week before the recording and wrote the whole record in 1 week or 10 days.
Wow.
All together. Wow. Yeah, that's some intense stuff. And they came into a series of live shows with a bunch of music they just wrote the week before, and with cameras, and with 2 Avid consoles, one for recording, one for the live show. It was intense. It's a big production. It's a really big production, and they pulled it off.
Yeah, and it speaks to their musicianship, right? Like, and their ability to get into a room and
they were guests too, because Bernard Wright came down, and then Spot came down, like a previous drummer from previous lineup, who's from Texas, came down, and the drum sets were changed, and one is a lefty and one is a righty, and it was like I was there watching it happen during the whole rehearsal set, all the setup. I was there. I saw the whole setup, and I was like, I don't want to be Nick right now. Nick is Nick, and it's good. I'm happy to just be a fly on the wall, because the stress level of stuff changing all the time, and having 20 audience members or 50 audience members on every, it's insane. They had to mix the headphone mix. They had to mix the rough, so we know which version is good to be able to pick which version for the album. This is crazy. It's an unbelievable undertaking. And people look at it, it looks pretty, it looks easy, and then Michael makes it look very easy, and all the boys, everybody makes it look like it's like a walk in the park. It wasn't. It's really intense. It's an intense logistics. Same on the label side. Jamie and Eric pulled an incredible feat with that whole operation.
So you've got your Focal room there, right? You're in a 914 config now there, and you did obviously the headphone mixes there as well. How was that kind of checking translation between the headphone mix and the speaker bass mix in your dungeon room?
In my dungeon, it's called the dungeon because it's in the basement, and we keep it dark. So I have developed this unorthodox, probably illegal technique, but I don't care. It works for me. So the MO is, well, working by myself is different, but working with somebody else in the room, they have to be able to hear everything, right? So what we did, if I remember well, is we did a first pass on the 914 system, which is, I'm very happy with it. The translation has been unbelievable. So it's a bunch of solo sixes, Focal solo sixes, and then we also have, and for the LR, we have trio 11s, because the room is a hybrid. It's Atmos, but it's also stereo room, where a lot of people come and track, which is unusual for an Atmos room, and a lot of hip hop people come and track, so they need the loudest speakers on earth. So we have two two trio 11s with 2 subs, so it is loud, and we have a Trinov system that lets you switch easily between stereo and Atmos, and also provides all the delays and room compensation. It's awesome. So we do a pass on that, and then I do a pass listening to the Dolby binaural. We have a special re-render real time that's happening that goes into a Dangerous Source headphone preamp, and then we check on headphones. And then I launched Logic and I ran the Dolby renderer into Logic in real time. And I have a template that lets me basically run my mixes from Pro Tools through the Dolby renderer into Logic, and so I can listen for the Apple spatialization plugin thingy. So that saves me the step of having to export my mix, import it in the Dolby renderer, export it as an MP4, send it to my phone, and all that crap. I don't have to do that. I just listen through. I have the three DAWs open. I have Pro Tools and the Dolby renderer, and then the Logic, and I actually listen in real time through my AirPod Pros or my AirPod Maxes. And so we did that with Nick because you can share. So we were able to listen and make decisions on the panning across all three platforms: the speakers, the Dolby binaural, and the Apple spatialization plugin. And that allowed us to have no surprises once the songs hit the DSPs because we heard everything in real time and we're able to adjust in real time.
That's great. You've got like the versatility of being able to go between each of those workstations and hear the playback and ensure that translation is accurate. And
you need a powerful computer to do that. Yeah, yeah. The fan came
out. And you also used the Dolby Atmos album assembler.
Yeah. So
as well.
That was a big treat from you guys. About 2/3 into the mix, I was able to get on the beta for the assembler. It wasn't out yet. So I got the very first alpha, like it was like, fresh out of the womb. And that really changed everything for me because on such long songs with such parameters and how it was recorded, matching the vibe of the tracks from track to track, it's easier to do in stereo. In Atmos, until the assembler, it was very hard to do. So with the assembler, we were able to I finished the album in the assembler. I exported everything. I took Dave McNair's stereo master and I put it in the assembler. And I was able to match everything perfectly in the assembler. And because the assembler has processing in it, whatever I missed on the mix side, and there's a couple songs that were a little too fat, and there were a couple songs that were a little too soft, and a couple songs that had like a little bit of a whatever, name it, a little 3K aggressive, whatever, I don't remember. But I was able to do that straight in the assembler and re-export all that and send that to delivery. That saved, well, it didn't even save time. It made the record better because I wouldn't even have tried to do that pre-assembler. The assembler was the missing piece of the puzzle to be able to make albums in Atmos. Making singles in Atmos, you can do all with the regular tools, but to make an album, a full album, without the assembler, it's very hard. So it's wonderful that it came out just at the right time, and I was invited to the beta, and I was able to make it. It made the record better. It really, really did. Actually, you know what? There was a song. Nobody knows this, but Trinity, the first single, was out. And then when I finished the album and I had the assembler, listening to Trinity, I was like, it doesn't, it's cool, but it doesn't fit because it was done before. It was the first one. So thanks to the assembler, I was able to needle drop throughout the whole album. And I was like, yo, let's remix that. So we went back and I tweaked Trinity in the assembler, and then I exported that and I sent it to the label, and they quietly replaced the existing single on all the DSPs. So what you're hearing, if you heard Trinity the week it came out, you heard one mix, and if you hear Trinity now, it's a different mix. It's not a big difference. It's like, I think I high passed at 20. I hadn't gone a in the vacuum of just one song. I made it as fast as possible, right? Because that's one of the beauties of Atmos. There's no limiter, so you can really go. And the LFE also is a fun thing. You don't want to shake walls. So I've gone all out. But some of the other songs did not lend themselves to that. So since it's the last song on the record, in the context of the record, once I listened to the whole sequence, when that came in, it felt like it was like way too fat. So I kind of like, yeah, give it a little bit of a corset, if you will. So voila.
Very cool. That's one of the coolest songs, I think. I mean, they're all amazing. I love that one because it's kind of like a cinematic, kind of slow burny, almost like spy jazz kind of vibe
It's
to
epic.
it.
It's absolutely epic.
and the strings and horns really kind of like get going, and like you get kind of immersed and settled into it, and then it like kind of progresses into like a groovy kind of fusion guitar thing, and the vocoder and all of that. It's very, very
Yeah,
cool too.
it's really cool. They really managed to. I mean, I feel like with this record, they managed to renew the sound, the Snarky Puppy sound. It's a new thing. They really, even though they've been making, I don't know, 10, 12 records, it's insane how many records they made. This one really has, I don't know how to explain it, has a peculiar freshness to it. And maybe it's because of the urgency, because all the Snarky records, if I'm not mistaken, were all recorded live one way or another, right? So that's not that element. I think it was the urgency, or I don't know. There was a certain spirit to it, and it translates into music. It's really fresh, and those melodies are awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's such a treat to be able to see the video and see them do it
Mhm.
live. I mean, I've just seen a
Yeah,
couple of the pieces that are on their site. I'm sure the entire uh, full length film is pretty special. They're going to be
yeah,
showcasing it at a couple of different spaces around
yeah.
the
It
country
is. It
coming
is
up
a.
soon.
It is really awesome. And Jep, the director and the videographer, if you will, who did DP and direction, he's awesome. He really can. He is on. Is at the level in his art that the Snarky Puppy guys are in theirs. It's nice.
Very nice. So switching gears just for a second, tell us a little bit about Pure Mix, and the platform that you've put together there for showcasing and education, and what you're
Yeah.
working on.
So PureMix is a online video educational platform where we help people get better at producing and mixing records. It started as a couple videos on how to mix something, some records I had made at the time, and now it's mushroomed. And we have 40 mentors. Some of my heroes are on the platform. Al Schmidt and Mick Gazalski, Tony Maserati, Andrew Sheff, some like friends and heroes. So that's pretty awesome. And basically, it's a monthly subscription where you can go and watch people who are maybe ahead of you in a journey of making records tell you how they got there. That was my original idea. You keep getting better at this. Is an art form, right? You keep getting better. If you don't keep getting better, it's time to do something else. And so the idea was to help people on the journey, and it's working very well. We have hundreds of thousands of members, and it's a beautiful community. And I always try to do, as a creative director on the content, I always try to do stuff that's unheard of or special. So for the Snarky Puppy one, I decided that I think people would like to see how such a madness is put together. So we were there for the whole week of rehearsals and setup, and we it's called a start to finish, and we picked one song which is a Coney Bear. I was gonna do Trinity, but then when I heard the length of Trinity and I heard I was like, nope, can't do that on camera. So we did Coney Bear, which is also awesome. And so you basically in the series, which would probably be a 11-part series, kind of like a Netflix series, you'll be able to see people walk into the empty room and the drums being hauled in and everything, all the way to the final Atmos mix, because we also shot the stereo mix of Coney Bear in Spain with Nick and Michael, and then we shot the Atmos mix of Coney Bear with Nick and myself in the dungeon at Flux. So you'll be able to see the whole arc of making that. And there's a lot of that on Pure Mix. We have a lot of start to finish stuff where you're able to be fly on the wall in the making of a record with the top music makers in the world. And then there's also like deconstructions of famous songs, and there's like tips and tricks videos, and there's technique videos. It's a good place to go to if you want to learn how to make records.
That's great. No, thank you for sharing that, and we'll pop the URL in here for people to go check it out. And if they want to find out more about Pure Mix or Flux, where should they head?
Well, PureMix is puremix.net, and then Flux is fluxstudios.net.
Excellent. So what's next for Fab? You're back in New York. Summer's over. What do you got
Yeah,
coming up?
I am currently doing the full Atmos mix of the entire album for the new Lolo Zuai record. And this is a special situation because I mixed the entire stereo record. So I don't have to make any calls to see if anything's acceptable or not. I do whatever the hell I want because I'm the mixer. So that's pretty awesome. So that's pretty much going to keep me busy for the next 2 weeks. It's a huge undertaking. There's like 250 tracks per song. And in this particular case, instead of exporting stems, I'm actually starting the Atmos mix from the stereo sessions. So I'm able to, because when you deliver a record in stems to the label, all the synths are together and all the background vocals are together, depending on how particular you are with the stems. But the standards, that's about that. And I felt like because of the record and how Stelios Fili, the producer, is very detailed and has a lot of ear candy everywhere, I decided that probably would be not as good as Atmos mix as it could be. So I actually took the sessions and cleaned the sessions up, and I'm starting from where the stereo mix ended, which is awesome in certain ways and a nightmare in others because it's a lot of tracks. And usually when you mix an Atmos, you have like 10 tracks. Snarky had 50 because it was insane. This is 200 tracks. So it's been an experience, but I love how it sounds. It's going to be very special. That's coming out in October 14th. And it's a good record. It's a beautiful record. It's her second record. The first one did great and got her a lot of play, and this one I think is going to do well. So I'm doing that, and then after that, I forget. I have like a bunch of albums.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Fab, for sharing all of that. If folks have questions for you, they can drop them into the questions menu here,
Yep.
and look forward to answering those here shortly.
Awesome.
Thank you. And with that, very excited to welcome Nick. Nick, thanks for joining us from New York. You just traveled back from Barcelona, where you're based and also work as well. Tell us a little bit about your studio and your work, and thanks for joining.
Yeah, well, I was here in New York for 22 years, and I still technically work here most of the time. But I decided that if I'm just mixing and people are sending me stuff remotely, I might as well be sitting in Spain doing it. So yeah, for the last couple of years I've been there. But yeah, I mean, I've sort of grew up in working in studios here in New York, and that's been it really.
Nice, man. Well, you've mixed over what, 100 Snarky Puppy live albums?
Yeah, it might even be up at like 2.
Incredible, man. So like what is your general approach to like mixing these live albums? And then maybe what was kind of different going into Empire Central? I know it's not technically like a live show, but it kind of was.
Yeah. Well, so I started doing the live show stuff with Snarky, and at the beginning they were on tour like in New York or wherever, and they were mailing hard drives. And so it would take, about 2 weeks for me to get my hands on it, and then I'd have, like 15, 20 shows to do. So it would take like 3 or 4 weeks to get stuff released. And then Michael had the genius idea of me going on tour with them, and then immediately after the show, taking a hard drive and mixing it on the bus in between destinations so that it could be released within 24 hours. So I mean, yeah, it's a different process, and that was all like template based stuff in the end, mostly because the listening environment in the back of a bus is not it's a little less than ideal. But yeah, I mean, it's very different than this, than Empire Central. This is actually the first of these like live in studio albums that I've done with them. The 2 previous albums I did with them were both studio albums we did at Sonic Ranch in Texas. But it was I basically treated it like a studio album. So there's just a few extra little complications like an audience and headphones and things like that, but tried to treat it as much like a studio album as possible.
And you guys were kind of thinking about how to create an immersive experience for the fans, because it's such like an amazing connection I think that a band like that has with its fans, that really, yes, it's captured in a in a recording, but it's really about like being there with them and feeling that energy. Did you think about how you and Fab would do that together in the immersive mix as you were going into the recording of that record?
Yeah, I mean, I knew would be doing it in Atmos from the very beginning, and so yeah, I spoke to Fab sort of before I sort of made the setup sheet and stuff, and just sort of thought about options and things we could do, and you know, the one thing that that I ended up doing was expanding for, instead of having like a pair or two pairs of room mics up, I ended up having 10. So 10 microphones in the ceiling throughout, covering the whole. And this is predominantly for audience interaction and stuff like that, but also for the ambience thing. You know, and normally I just use like two pairs of room mics for that stuff. But yeah, here we 10 mics.
And then you guys are sitting down with 30, 40, 50 stems to work from, to like get into, and that's fun.
Yeah, we sort of thought it was best to be able to have the, you know, the freedom on this stuff. And like I've said in the video, we ended up sort of going back into like some of the drum stems and exporting some stuff separately, you know, so that we could do different reverbs and things like that. So, but yeah, it sort of felt like it was worth the extra trouble for the fun stuff we could do.
Right on. Well, we've got a lot of questions coming in, and a lot of questions about how you guys mixed and the approach you took, which some of you've touched on already, but maybe we can elaborate a little bit. Alejandro asks, when you're mixing in Atmos with stereo stem files, are they already processed with stereo reverb? Fab, do you use an Atmos reverb to spread ambience throughout the room? And how do you generally manage reverb in the Atmos stage?
Yes, yes, and yes. So we got a lot of the ambiences from Nick's, because when Nick exported his stems, he left his processing on it, because the idea is not to do something completely new. The idea is to still, you know, they got to be at least very, very close cousin, you know, like kissing cousins, the two mixes. But to be able to really take advantage of the space, we added extra, more Atmos-driven reverbs. In my Atmos template, I have a bunch of Valhalla reverbs that are actually fed from one aux that goes into 3 or 4 reverbs of different length that are spread across the whole spectrum and the whole space. So you can send, I think we used quite a bit on the snares. The snare, where actually we were able to send the snare to that Atmos reverb to give it height. No, it's not like, it was just literally spatialization using a short array of Valhalla reverbs spread across the whole space. We could have done it with true Atmos reverb, like the Liquid Sonic stuff, and we did use that on a couple things, but mostly we used the Valhalla stuff because we could play with different lengths. And actually, Nick came up with this idea for, I don't remember which song, but he was like, "Do you think Belmont? Do you think we could make the reverb go?" And I was like, "Yeah, we could probably do that," and we did by using.
Over you after this.
Yeah, it goes over you. Yeah. So we did that. So it's a more mellow song, and so there's more space, and not all 20 dudes are playing at the same time. So it allowed us to do this effect, which was Nick's idea, and we used that by changing the length of 3 or 4 Valhalla reverbs and placing them different places, different space over your head and in the back, which gave that impression that it's actually going over your head. Things like that. But overall, it was mostly your ambiances, right? And then the room.
Yeah, and I think there were some instances where we recreated some of my reverbs in an Atmos setup. So instead of just having a stereo return or reverb, we had a few instances of it, of the same one that I used in the stereo mix, but just in the Atmos session.
Yep. Yeah, and that allowed us to keep the tonality the same, but really make you feel you're inside the place.
So Sam had asked about what your favorite plugins are. Maybe you could, if you have any more to elaborate on that, you can. But he also asked if you, Fab, had come from cinema Atmos mixing as your introduction into Atmos.
Nah, I come from rock and roll, baby. Folk and roll. I come from folk and roll. No, No, I think the two, correct, Nick, you have a way better memory than I do, but I think the two Atmos plugins we used were the Nugent Halo Upmix, which we used a significant amount to specialize mostly like long form, like pads and stuff like that. And then the Liquid Sonics cinematic verbs, we use those two.
Yeah.
And then Nick came up with this idea that he wanted to be inside a Leslie because it's an organ. And so we did this contraption of an autopan, like an ancient autopan thing, which I think I stole from Andrew Chefs, and we fed the organ into the autopan, which would then fed into a 7.0 thing. So when you hear the organ and the Leslie ramps up, we're in the middle of it. That was Nick's idea, and I stole the making of from Chefs. So there you go. I think that's like the most Atmos plugin driven stuff. Everything else was really placement and creativity and ideas. Like, because Snarky Puppy, it's not a Hollywood thing, right? It has to be, the texture of it has to be real, and you have to connect with it in a true human way. It's not supposed to make you go elsewhere. You're there to witness the magic of these amazing musicians, right? And so doing crazy stuff and stuff flying around all over your head and stuff, that wasn't the vibe. The vibe was to truly get you, like, make the world vanish and you were with the guys. That was the idea. But we still kind of let loose on some things, like the Leslie, or what is it we put on the
the wind chimes, the beltry.
Yeah, we had a height subgroup, if you will, and there was an auto pan feeding it, so we were able to one of the percussion players loves his chimes. It's kind of like a thing in Snarky. So whenever you would hit the chimes, they are just circling over your head. It's discreet and tasteful, but it's, we had a lot of fun doing that. Yeah.
So you had a lot of fun with the placement, and Paul asks, even further, how did you decide on placements for different instruments? Was it a trial and error kind of thing? And I know you touched on it a little bit in the conversation, Fab, but maybe we can get Nick's take on some of the placement choices.
Yeah, basically this is the first like Atmos experience mixing that I've had. So sort of deferring to Fab a lot on this stuff, and Fab would sort of place the drums. He had this idea for where the drums and the bass should be. And then the other stuff, I feel like it was just experimenting and just trial and error, and therefore it varied from tune to tune. Like the same thing didn't seem to work from one song to the next. So in some instances, the horns are all in the front, and in other songs they're like wrapping like completely around you. So there was a lot of trial and error and just figuring out what felt best for the song. So
there are no rules, and that's the thing that can be terrifying when you start doing Atmos. There are really no rules. Right? It's a wide open field, right? In this case, we had a nice how do you say, playground, like an environment to work with. We had the video, so sometimes we made choices of placement, and we looked at the video and we were like, nah, that's dumb. So a lot of the constraints, we had a more defined playground because of the video, and that allowed us to look at it and say, yeah, this feels good or it doesn't feel good. But most of the choices in Atmos that we did with Nick, or that I do when I mix in Atmos, it's all about feel, and it's all about like, how far can I push this, and is it going to translate, and are people going to think I'm insane? That's pretty much, those are the parameters. So yeah.
So speaking of translation, Ninad asks, with so many musicians and tracks, how did your binaural mix sound compared to the speaker mix? And I think you talked a little bit about how you QC'd it, but maybe we could just share that again.
Nick, do you want to take that?
Well, yeah, so for me, like I said, this was my first sort of experience into this. It was definitely like a shocker, experiencing some of the binaural stuff, and especially the difference between the Apple and the Dolby, use of these files. But I think there was something really different and interesting about the binaural rendering of the mixes, which Yeah, I mean, at points I was definitely preferring that to the stereo, which was super interesting. Obviously, going from full speaker setup down to binaural took some adjusting and having to like check my ears. And also learn how to listen to that. I think was it was like, this seemed to be like a little bit of a learning curve, trying to understand where the placement of stuff was in the binaural render for me. But yeah, it was an interesting process.
I had that shock earlier last year, so I knew that Nick was going to have that shock, and so I had prepared everything to make sure that he was entering that realm in the best possible way, right, with the best possible safeguards and the best monitoring situation possible, because it's basically trying to shoot a target with a bow and arrow, right? And if you're mixing stereo, the target's about this big because you're mixing in stereo. And then you know that some people are going to listen to it on this crap, and some people are going to listen to it in other crap, and some people are going to listen to it on good stuff, right? But that we know that we've been doing this for years. For Atmos, the target is a little wider, right? It's still a target, but it's wider. And so people are going to listen to it on speakers. So people listen to it on this crap, and people are going to listen to it through, whether Tidal or Amazon. And then some people are going to listen to it on Apple. And it's like, that's a wide target. So you really have to aim into the translation is the main concern for me, to make sure that the music doesn't get forgotten in the joy of the new creative capabilities. It's very easy to get lost in like, oh, I can do this. Let's make the thing go, and then you realize that on some playback system it just sounds that, and then you don't hear it. So these constraints, fortunately, I had made a very significant amount of the mistakes before, so we didn't have to make those mistakes on the Snarky record. And we were able to really have a workflow that allowed us to make sure that all three listening experiences were in the family.
Awesome. So specific gear questions. These are always a popular question. This is always a popular question. So we'll start with you, Nick. What is your preferred Chad asks, what's your preferred DAW and interface? And I'm sure this could be dependent on what you're doing or where you are, but go for it.
Sure. I mean, I've been using Pro Tools more or less since it began, and so I'm most comfortable with it. So I'm using Pro Tools for 99.9% of stuff I do. Occasionally getting into Ableton, but very infrequently. And then as far as interfaces go, I mean, I tend to work in a lot of different studios for recording, and so experiencing different things. And I feel like these days the difference isn't as wide as it used to be. Sort of back in the day when the Apogees came out and how much better they were than the 888s and all that stuff. But I will say that like the Burl converters were sort of stood out to me at some point. But really, I think it's not the most important thing that's happening in the mix.
How about on your side, Fab?
I use Pro Tools with Universal Audio interfaces 90% of the time, or Luna, because I tend to work in Luna now. I get more and more sessions in Ableton, and sometimes it's impossible to export the music out of Ableton, so I have to mix in Ableton. And all that is done usually with Apollos. And then the Atmos room in the dungeon is done with a full HDX rig with digital 192s and the DJI 16x16 and a Trinov monitor system. I also have a Trinov monitor system upstairs. So, it depends. If I'm mixing an album really quick, like stereo mixing, go. Stems come in, get the stuff. I will do that in Pro Tools. If I'm producing a record and I have full leeway and I don't have to collaborate with anybody else, I do it all in Luna. And then I work with producers who are in Ableton. They are very thankful to bypass the process of exporting 150 stems out of Ableton, and they just send me the session and say, "Merry Christmas." So voila.
Nice. Fab, Chris from L Acoustics says hello. He was the technician who was doing the playback event in London and says it was an incredibly clear and detailed mix and everyone was blown away. So that's fantastic. He also asks, how much did you find having spatial separation of all of the audio sources helped with clarity in the mix?
But that's everything. Nick's stems were like, it would be basically very close to having the raw tracks, except they had been completely fixed, enhanced, and doctored to the point as if it was the perfect recording that you could just push the faders up and it sounds like a record. So we got like a perfect set of stems from Nick. That obviously made the whole difference. But then the second day, Nick was like, "What if we exported the bass drums?" And we separated the bass drums from the stereo drum mixes. And I'm like, be my guest. And so that allowed us to drop the bottom of the record even further, right? Because we were able to separate the processing on the mix bus, or whatever processing was on Nick's mix bus that would be applied to the stereo stems. We were able to get the bass drums to not be affected by that as much. So it allowed us to do more things. So yeah, I mean, this was kind of like the perfect situation. However, it's not for everyone to do, say, Trinity, like a 10-minute song with 50, 60 stems. You have to have a lot of free time on your hands. It was definitely, and also when you hear the song, it's like 3 songs in one, Trinity. Like it changes. It's just like, yeah. So yes, having mixed stems and presence there made it what it is. It would have been sounded totally different if I did it by myself. And the clarity comes from his stereo work, us not having to fix anything. We were actually mixing. There were a couple of things we discovered though in the Atmos stuff, because there's so much less compression and so much less bunching up. So all of a sudden, when you have a pimple on your nose, it's like, oh, look, he has a pimple on your nose. But there's tools for that.
Far more revealing in some cases, yes.
Yeah.
Jeffrey asks, well, he says, I'm a drummer and I've been trying to mix the drums in Atmos to sound like I'm listening from the drummer's position, surrounded by toms and cymbals. Have either of you done anything like that, or do you try to keep the drums in a tight config?
We did that, didn't we? Didn't we export the toms?
Yeah. What was it? Yeah, we check out the record. So I personally haven't done that exactly that. That's a very interesting thing, but I think the target audience for that is drummers, which is a pretty niche thing, because most humans listen to drums from a distance. They're not in the middle of it, although it could be a nice experience. However, we did take those stereo toms and made like full on like.
That was the thing, yeah. So the placement of the toms sort of went wrapped around from the sort of left side to the right side. That's one of the reasons we went back and sort of broke out some stuff out of the drums, actually.
And the thing that's fun is that the place on some songs it's more obvious than others, but on the songs where we really went crazy on the toms, it's totally decorrelated from where the drums are. So the drums could be in the video, yeah. And so it's a fascinating experience because you're seeing a dude doing tukadoo, and then you hear whoosh, and that's pretty cool. That was fun. We actually laughed quite a bit. We were laughing. Sometimes we would hear some of the stuff we did, and we'd listen to it, we'd look at each other, and just laugh. It was just so much fun.
It brought joy. It brought joy into the experience.
Absolutely.
So thank you everybody for your questions. With that, we've come to time. The first 3 singles from Empire Central, Bet, Belmont, and Trinity are now available in Dolby Atmos on enabled streaming services. The album drops September 30th, right? Next Friday. So congratulations guys on that. There are some listening sessions coming up as well. New York is next Monday. So looking forward to that one, and people can definitely check out some of the videos and get more information at Snarky Puppy's site. So Nick, Fab, thank you very much for your time and sharing all of your wisdom. Great to see you both.
Pleasure. Yeah. And don't forget, there will be a making of this record. Gone. No problem.
Oh shit.
I did. Thank you.
Okay.
Don't worry about it.
No, we're still on. Go for it.
It's cool. We are?
Yep.
Okay. So just a last word is, if you're curious to know how Nick recorded this and how the whole thing came together, and want to be a fly on the wall on the everything from the setup to the recording to the first live show, and then Nick mixing it in stereo, and then the two of us mixing it in Atmos, there will be a full series on puremex.net started mid-October, where you'll be able to see all that, warts and all. It's all like reality TV style. It's cool.
Great. Well, we'll definitely pump that as well. So looking forward to it.
Awesome.
Very nice.
Thank you guys so much.
Yeah.
Cheers.